The story of the Cold War in the Caribbean is deep and complex, and you would be easily forgiven if your first thoughts went to Fidel, Che, and Cuba, but the Cold War history of the Caribbean is much deeper and richer than just El Comandante and his eventual communist revolution. The region played not just host to one of the most dangerous single moments of the period, but was also where two neighboring countries carried out a decades-long struggle against each other, both with the support of the United States and often carried out against their own domestic populations. I'm your host David, and today we are going to look at one of these stranger, more complicated relationships present in international affairs, that between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This is the Cold War. Okay, so on the surface, they share everything. A single island, a tangled colonial history, a common enemy among imperial powers. However, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, two nations occupying the same patch of Caribbean land, have long viewed each other as anything but neighbors. By the middle of the 20th century, both countries were under the control of brutal dictators, Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic and François Papa-Doc Duvalier in Haiti. Each ruled through violence, fear, and propaganda. Both claimed to be the savior of their people, and both understood that, in the shadows of the Cold War, survival depended on pleasing one superpower above all others, the United States. But rather than uniting them as anti-communist allies, the Cold War only intensified the long-standing hostility between them. As the US and Cuba vied for influence in the Caribbean, these two regimes, both rooted in nationalism, racism, and paranoia, launched propaganda efforts, military crackdowns, and even assassination plots against each other. This is a Cold War story that didn't just unfold in the halls of Washington or Havana, but along a blood-soaked border between two nations, each with a history of violence, mistrust, and betrayal. To understand how two nations could hate each other so deeply despite sharing the same island, we need to look back in history all the way to the early 19th century. Haiti, the world's first black republic, emerged in 1804 after a successful slave rebellion against French colonial rule. It was revolutionary, radical, and deeply threatening to white-dominated societies across the Americas. To its east, the Spanish-speaking colony of Santo Domingo, what would become today's Dominican Republic, was poorer, whiter, and more Catholic. When Haiti invaded Santo Domingo in 1822, unifying the island under President Jean-Pierre Boyer, Dominicans didn't see liberation, they saw occupation. For 22 years, Haitian forces governed the east. Churches were stripped of land, heavy taxes were imposed to pay off Haiti's crushing debt to France, and Dominicans, already culturally distinct, began to define themselves explicitly against their Haitian rulers. By 1844, the Dominican Republic had declared independence from Haiti, not Spain. That foundational story has shaped Dominican identity for generations. To be Dominican increasingly meant to be not Haitian, not black, not Creole, not African. This radical divide only deepened over time, fueled by war, border skirmishes, and economic inequality. When the United States occupied both countries in the early 20th century, Haiti from 1915 to 1934, and the DR from 1916 to 1924, it trained new national militaries that would later empower the island's most notorious dictators. Rafael Trujillo came to power in 1930 with support from the US-trained Dominican National Guard. He swiftly established one of the most oppressive regimes in the hemisphere. At the core of Trujillo's dictatorship was a hostile, state-backed anti-Haitian ideology. He insisted that Dominican identity was Hispanic, Catholic, European, and racially Indio, meaning a mestizo mix of Spanish and Taino. Haitians, on the other hand, were portrayed as primitive, African, and godless. And to reinforce this divide, Trujillo resorted to violence. In October 1937, Dominican troops under Trujillo's orders slaughtered thousands of Haitians living near the border between the two countries. Known in French as the massacre de Persil and in Spanish as the massacre de Perejil, the Parsley massacre, soldiers allegedly used the Spanish word perejil, meaning parsley, as a linguistic test. Those who couldn't pronounce it correctly were assumed to be Haitian and executed. The consensus among academics is that this is actually a myth, but one that persists to this day. Regardless of the vetting process, estimates of the death toll range from between 5,000 to over 20,000 killed. The massacre was swift, brutal, and state-sponsored ethnic cleansing, if not genocide, and possibly 60% of the Haitian population in the Dominican Republic were killed and the rest forced to flee across the border to Haiti. Yet Trujillo faced no real consequences. Under US pressure, he agreed to pay token reparations to Haiti, but most of this never actually reached the victims' families. For Haiti, the massacre became a national trauma. For Trujillo, it served as a warning to any neighbor or domestic critic who dared challenge his authority. Now, 2 decades later, on the western side of the island, a new strongman appeared. In 1957, François Papadoc Duvalier was elected president of Haiti, riding a wave of Noiriste ideology, black nationalism that celebrated Haiti's African heritage. Once in office, Duvalier declared himself president for life, suppressed the opposition, and unleashed a paramilitary terror squad known as the Tonton Macoute, named after the mythical Haitian figure who, so the story went, would kidnap misbehaving children in a gunny sack, a macoute, and then eat them for breakfast. Where Trujillo was a flashy nationalist with military flair, Duvalier, whose nickname of Papa Doc derived from his medical practice that he had before entering politics, was a master of psychological warfare. He styled himself after the voodoo priest Baron Samedi, wore dark glasses in public, and claimed mystical powers. He turned Haitian poverty into patriotic virtue and blamed any crisis on foreign enemies. Conveniently, to the east, Trujillo loomed large. The two men harbored a mutual hatred and kept a wary eye on each other's borders. 1958, Duvalier survived an assassination attempt by Haitian exiles, many of whom had reportedly been permitted to organize in the Dominican Republic. Trujillo had a long history of harboring Haitian dissidents or backing their assassinations. Mutual paranoia intensified, and then everything changed. In January 1959, Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba, and the entire Caribbean became a Cold War pressure cooker. Both Duvalier and Trujillo hurried to demonstrate their anti-communist credentials to Washington, but they also feared that revolution might spread to their own countries. And not without reason. In June 1959, Cuban-trained Dominican exiles launched an invasion of the DR, hoping to spark a rebellion. The following month, a similar group of rebels landed in Haiti, aiming to overthrow Duvalier. Both invasions failed, but they convinced the dictators that Cold War ideology was now a matter of regime survival. Trujillo started cracking down more aggressively. Duvalier, not to be outdone, went even further by offering the US full access to Haitian territory for anti-Castro operations in exchange for military support and aid. And it worked. The US, already wary of Trujillo's increasing abuses, started to shift its support to Duvalier, not because he was less brutal, but because he played Cold War politics better. Trujillo was assassinated in 1961, likely with CIA support, though whether that support went beyond supplying weapons has long been debated. In a 1973 memorandum, the CIA acknowledged having, quote, quite extensive involvement with the men who plotted the assassination. In the Dominican Republic, a new era began, but not a stable one. In 1962, leftist reformer Juan Bosch was elected president. He promised land reform, labor rights, and diplomatic ties with Cuba. These were moves that looked to improve the conditions of the average Dominican citizen, but also ones that shouted socialism. To neighboring Duvalier, this was an existential threat. The tension exploded in April 1963 when Duvalier's secret police stormed the Dominican embassy in Port-au-Prince, dragging out a political opponent who had claimed asylum. Bosch called it an invasion of Dominican territory. Troops mobilized, war seemed possible. The Organization of American States rushed in to mediate. Duvalier blinked first and released the kidnapped dissident. However, Bosch was weakened, and a few months later, he was overthrown in a right-wing coup supported by Dominican military leaders, aligned with the US, and Duvalierist interests. Once again, Duvalier had outlasted a rival, and the Cold War had claimed another democratic casualty. With Bosch now gone, the Dominican Republic settled into a new authoritarian rhythm under Joaquin Balaguer, a former Trujillo ally who knew how to speak Washington's language. Balaguer and Duvalier, both deeply conservative, anti-communist, and skilled propagandists, found common ground. They signed labor agreements that brought thousands of Haitian workers into the Dominican sugar industry. For many Haitians, it was their only way to survive. But conditions in the bateas, the labor camps, were terrible. Workers were paid poorly, were denied citizenship and therefore rights, and exploited by Dominican authorities and sugar barons. Haitian governments, including Duvalier's, took a portion of their wages in exchange for allowing the migration. It was a discreet arrangement, despotic, profitable, and unnoticed by the Cold War's major stories. And it kept the border relatively calm, at least officially. Behind the scenes, exiled Cuban and Dominican militias plotted against both regimes. In 1966, the CIA uncovered a joint plan involving Dominican officers and Haitian General Léon Cantave to overthrow Duvalier, using Dominican territory as a staging ground. The plot was shut down, but it revealed how porous the political lines remained, even under supposed allies. Beyond politics and coups, the cultural divide between Haiti and the Dominican Republic only deepened during the Cold War. In the Dominican Republic, schoolbooks and nationalist rhetoric portrayed Haitians as a racial and cultural threat. Anti-Haitianismo became state policy under Trujillo and persisted under Balaguer. Haitians were depicted as black, pagan, and uncivilized, in contrast to the Catholic, Spanish-speaking Indio identity. Dominicans clung to language, religion, and race and became tools of that exclusion. In Haiti, Duvalier promoted a proud black nationalism. French and Creole were elevated. Voodoo was tolerated as a symbol of cultural pride. Haitians saw Dominicans as colonized people trying to erase their African roots. Even popular memory was at odds. Dominicans celebrated their independence from Haiti. Haitians remembered the Parsley massacre. Reconciliation was not on the menu. Throughout this entire period, the Cold War superpowers watched and intervened as it suited them. The United States propped up both Trujillo and Duvalier at different times, depending on which was more useful in containing communism. Human rights abuses were tolerated, assassinations overlooked. Stability was the key word, and dictators, at least the ones that wanted to remain in power, knew how to spell it in Washington's language. Cuba, meanwhile, offered support to exiles and revolutionaries, but ultimately failed to export its revolution to Hispaniola. After the 1959 invasions, Castro pulled back. Both Duvalier and Balaguer crushed leftist dissent with brutal efficiency. The CIA funded assassination plots and kept tabs on both countries. In the Dominican Republic, it directly supported Trujillo's assassins. In Haiti, it stopped short of removing Duvalier, but drew up plans to do so if necessary. It was Cold War pragmatism at its finest. Better the devil you know, as long as he wasn't red. Now, we haven't gone into a ton of detail over the brutalities that both Haiti and the DR enacted on each other, and especially their own citizens. The Tonton Macoute had a fearsome and brutal reputation that they earned through their terror methods, while Trujillo's Service de Inteligencia Militar had their own reputation for brutality and repression. For those who may be interested in further reading, I recommend Alex von Tunzelmann's 2011 work, Red Heat: Conspiracy, Murder, and the Cold War in the Caribbean. As we begin to wrap up this episode, we should state that the Cold War didn't create the divide between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, but it certainly exploited it. Superpowers picked their favorites. Dictators weaponized race and nationalism, and, as so often is the case, the people, poor, displaced, and often undocumented, paid the price. The legacy of this period still shadows the island. Anti-Haitian feelings continue to influence Dominican politics. Migrant labor remains a contentious issue, and the memories of 1937, of embassy raids, and border massacres still are fresh on both sides. Today, the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic is more than just a line on a map. It's a scar shaped by colonialism, reinforced by dictatorship and deepened by a Cold War that, for two small nations, never truly ended. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss our future work, please make sure you subscribe to our channel and have pressed the bell button, which is just trying to get by, look after his family, and not get caught between the personal feuds of two national leaders who hate each other. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, please remember that history is shades of gray and rarely black and white.